That's
Thank
it.
you.
Someone started
All
it.
right.
Thanks.
Well, welcome. I'll start my little internal timer so I know what time it is. So my name is Vincent Cosomano, and I'm going to be discussing assumed breach. I might annoy some CISOs, but any good talk in security, I think, annoys at least a few CISOs in the room. So I'm going to be discussing the mindset of assumed breach, what procedural memory is, and bring a little educational theory in here. And then I'll discuss threat hunting and the reason why those two things are really valuable for threat hunting. So a little bit about me. I do things related to security operations. If you've been at a local security event and you haven't walked up to me before and you like chatting about security operations or security, you should definitely walk up next time there's a conference. And I've been around the security community for a while down here in South Florida. I teach at this gigantic U place, cybersecurity, and that's a ton of fun because students are always excited, and you should definitely go hire students if you're looking to hire people. And I have the BSA logo up here because my start in IT and business and all the skills that I'm using today, a lot of them either started or I learned them completely in the scouting program. So risk appetite, not covered. All the things required to sit down and start doing that work very quickly is all taught in the scouting program. And then Hack Miami, where I met people like Danielle and Blue Fox and all the great people putting on these conferences. And then occasionally I stop working and I play some games, but definitely not very often, although that's something I do enjoy when I get to do it. So first off, what is assumed breach? I named the whole talk after that. So assumed breach is something that I disagree with a lot of people on. Some people say it's admitting defeat. It's like, oh, well, if you're assuming you're going to get breached, you're a bad CISO. And I don't agree with that. I don't think that's fair. I think that assumed breach is very valuable, or I probably wouldn't have named a talk after it. Also, though, if we look at how risk works and that there is a risk of something, that is not a guarantee that thing's going to happen. So not admitting defeat, also not saying we are for sure going to get breached. However, assumed breach is assuming we have been breached. So while we're not promising that there is a breach, we're going to act as if we already know that we've been breached. This is a very useful tool for defenders because it provides us with a mindset that we can use. So we've been breached. What should we do? Hopefully you've thought about this before you actually have a breach, but this is not much different than any other breach. We want to look for evidence. That's if you have an incident, you want to go collect evidence so you can start your response process and see what you're working with. But if we have a breach like this one we're using right now, where we're just assuming we've been breached, but we don't have a specific tip of where to start this investigation, it can be really hard to find out where to start. So while I don't get to game often, I still have a great love of cheat codes and use them. The attackers aren't going to follow some specific book of rules, so why should we use some cheat codes? We had looked for cheat codes from a number of different places, and I'm including some throughout the talk, but our knowledge and experience is probably some of the most valuable cheat codes that we can use. And when a lot of people talk about threat hunting, it's this thing where really, really smart people sit down in front of evidence, scroll through it, and things stand out to them. And they say, oh, yeah, that's an intrusion. I'm going to go find the evidence to back this up. But from this one line right here, I know you've been hacked in this way. And that can feel like what it is when people describe it that way. And you see somebody doing threat hunting and they're just kind of poking around. But there's more going on behind the scenes. So I'm going to take us through an example where we're going to use memory forensics and the process somebody might be going through, even if to them, they're just opening up some logs and looking through some artifacts. So some people's organizations send them to training, and some people go to training on vacation. And you may have seen this poster before. And if it was just a paid poster, I wouldn't show it, but they sponsor a lot of our events down here and usually give out free posters. So I included it. And if you're learning memory forensics, understanding processes that are normal in Windows may be very valuable to you. In fact, it's almost certainly valuable. So I'm going to use this as my example. So we're doing memory forensics, and we're just going through the processes that were captured. We're seeing the list, and we're looking at the process IDs. and what processes spawned those. And so we might see services.exe, totally normal, should probably only be one. And the thing that's supposed to spawn it is winInit.exe. Now, if there's two services.exe and Word spawned one of them, we might have a problem. And that is something somebody might just scroll through and say, oh, that's a problem. But there's more steps involved there than just scrolling through, immediately catching that this is a thing, because the person took the time to go look at this exact type of evidence to see if this was there or not. So how did that work? Well, first we assumed we were already breached. That's the first step, because we are using assumed breach. And then the person sits down and, because they have experience doing memory forensics, they might ask you, give me an image of some machine, give me access to some memory artifacts, and let's go look through it. And it could be memory artifacts, it could be firewall logs, which is my usual go-to. It could be Active Directory logs, which I've done a lot of threat hunting with. So that person might be guiding what evidence they choose to work with based off of where they have knowledge and experience. But that doesn't mean we have to have all that knowledge and experience when we first start. So this person might believe there's a malicious process. Now that could be biased due to where their skills are or for another reason, but regardless, that's the hypothesis, which is more narrow than just we've been breached. But this is still kind of hard to test. So we want to be even more specific. So we go a little bit further and we assume that there is a malicious process, and we assume that it's services.exe. So we go through there and then we see if the parent process ID is not equal to winInit, our hypothesis was correct. And this is how we're able to narrow down from a wide hypothesis like we've been breached down to a specific testable action. Where else might we use this? Who's walked before? Who's walked today? I know a lot of you are probably watching this from in bed, but it's past 4 p.m. You've probably gotten up at least to go to use the restroom. So if you've walked before, how did you do it? Did you stand up and think about transferring weight to one side and then moving your foot and then transferring the weight again? Or did you get up and go walk across the room? And a lot of people say humans are bad at multitasking, and there's great arguments for and against this. And for much smarter people will make these arguments and you can read them. But the reason why we can get up and walk and still have an engaging conversation is because walking is something we've done enough that it's moved into what's called procedural memory. And procedural memory is something that allows a lot of different experts to have more space in working memory and be able to learn new things faster and be able to work more efficiently and be able to maybe have a discussion while they're going through some logs. Now that I advise against, but some people do it. So if we have this procedural memory as experts, where maybe we just pull up some memory, we start looking through the processes and see if something stands out, well, what's the opposite of this? So we normally start learning how to do a new task by looking at the steps, and we store that in declarative memory, or that's what that type of memory is referred to. So we have this declarative memory, and eventually you move to procedural memory. If we want to do threat hunting and enable more people to do threat hunting, we want to occasionally take steps back and move from procedural memory back into declarative memory. And this is exactly the opposite of what we want to do when we want to learn something, because usually we want to be so good at it that we don't have to go check our notes about how to do it every time. And I know when I was in the SOC, I had to check detailed notes about how to read log files every time I was reading a log entry, I would never have been able to catch up with my workload. So this is the exact opposite of what we want to do when learning. But this isn't just about learning threat hunting. It's also about being able to teach. Moving from procedural memory into declarative memory means we can explain things better. If I told you just get up and walk, that'd be pretty tough. Oh, just go swim, just go ride the bike already. That's a big task. It's going to be really hard for that person to be successful. But if we instead explain the steps involved in riding a bike and how it works, and say more than just go fast and it'll be easier, then the person will probably be able to learn this faster. So this is why I'm recommending that we start moving from procedural memory into declarative memory, when we're trying to teach things. And I've applied this to threat hunting, which is how I've come up with this talk. Because somebody said, oh, well, just talk about threat hunting. I was like, how do I teach threat hunting? Everybody seems to define it as just sitting down and looking for problems. But once I went through this process, I was able to come up with some specific steps that I was using. And then I talked to colleagues and got it validated that they were like, yeah, this is what we're doing. So let's have an example from within threat hunting specifically. Okay. A lot of people like MITRE ATT&CK framework, and it's pretty cool. So we could look at technique 1568, which is dynamic resolution. We might have certain things related to domain names that are being used to communicate information or being used to evade our detection. And so how do we detect this? If we have the hypothesis that this is occurring in our network, we need an experiment to see if it's there. So we could look at the entropy of domain names. Now, this isn't something that, oh, well, let's come up with the wildest idea and try that. Totally brainstorm with the wildest ideas, but then sit down and see if somebody's done it before, which is what I did when I built this talk. And I saw that, in fact, Red Canary's done this. Red Canary has a whole blog post explaining entropy in great detail and then talking about how they apply it to threat hunting. And they might not say threat hunting specifically, oh, they do, but you can apply this in a number of other different ways. So we're taking something we know, maybe entropy, and we're taking our evidence and we're seeing how we can combine these two things to be able to do threat hunting. Now, how did we get here? So I mentioned narrowing down our hypothesis, but this is a very specific one. And if we're not used to being defenders already, and maybe we're new to defense, we might need a better, more specific starting point than just be specific. So I'll take another step back and say, well, what does threat hunting look like from above? So I made this poster, which I'm biased towards, and I hope that it kind of explains where the path that I see threat hunting taking. We start out here with intelligence. So if we want intelligence-informed threat hunting, we need intelligence from somewhere. And this can come from within our own organization. Maybe we have experience defeating the attackers or mitigating the effects of different attackers that we know are going to continue impacting our organization. Maybe we've done malware analysis and we know a lot about how their malware works, and we can go look for those specific indicators of compromise. But this doesn't have to be internal. We don't need a whole threat intelligence team in order to start doing threat hunting. And that's another thing a lot of people disagree with me on is, no, you don't need to spend a ton of money on threat intelligence to do threat hunting, because there's a lot of external threat intelligence that we can use and other sources of intelligence. So one is an ISAC. Meet your peers. If you work in healthcare, go talk to the hospitals near you. Go join InfraGard, go join the healthcare ISAC. If you work in finance, go join the finance ISAC. There are peers. And if you don't know the peers around you, you should take the time to find out who they are. Any job like this that's stressful can start to feel like, oh, well, I'm the only one who does this because it's so specific and so challenging. And we're not. None of us are. So keep showing up to ISSA events and also meet the people who work in the areas you work in, because you might have threats that other people aren't already dealing with. And then, because everybody loves MITRE, and somebody would scream at me if I didn't mention MITRE here, you can use MITRE ATT&CK, as I did in the last example. So you can look at the tactics, techniques, and procedures of different adversaries who you think are or might be targeting your organization, and use these to be able to look for things you can test. So we might use that last example because it's part of a procedure that a specific attacker uses against organizations like ours. So these are all different ways that we could get intelligence to start this. We don't have to already have all this experience ourselves. As with anything, we can benefit off the experience of others by reading, going to talks, and doing research. So what's the second half? Well, this is the fun part. This is where we do experiments. This is a scientific method. So we form a hypothesis based off of the intelligence that we have. And then we do an experiment. Now, if we're wrong and our test shows our hypothesis was completely wrong, we learned something. There is an ROI here. It's not a loss of investment. Even if we didn't learn anything new about our attackers, we probably learned something about our network. If we didn't learn anything about how our network's set up and what's in it, we probably learned something about the tools our team has access to. And if we didn't learn anything about our teams, we probably learned how our protocol works or some other piece of technical information that is now being added to our experience and will make us better threat hunters. So regardless of the outcome of the experiment, we learn something. And if we're wrong, we just form a new hypothesis. We use that information to make a more informed hypothesis and start over here. Now, if the hypothesis is correct, not only have we learned something, but we've just shown that there's an incident. So you should kick off your incident response procedures. So this is how I see threat hunting working, is start with intelligence. What that means depends on the size of your organization, your budget, and who you are and what you have already done with your career. But once you have some information, we can use that to form hypotheses, conduct experiments. We're going to learn something regardless. And hopefully we're not catching new breaches, but when we're breached, hopefully this process can give us a better chance of finding it. So really thinking about assumed breach. If you sit down and say, oh, well, we've already been breached and you're being defeatist, your board might not like that. And if we go in front of our board and we say we're definitely going to be breached because we're assuming breach, your investment might move to insurance instead of countermeasures and visibility. But if instead we have assumed breach as a mindset and we are assuming we're already breached and we move our focus to finding how we've been breached, what the attacker is doing, what they have accessed, now we're in a really good mindset to defend our organization. We can conduct experiments. We can probably, if our hypothesis is wrong, we probably found some gap in telemetry during this experiment. We might identify a new control that needs to be put in place. So all things that we can do as a result of assumed breach and the threat hunting process. But this isn't it. There's more that you can learn. So I hope to at least throw out some ideas for defenders in the room to sit down and maybe relook at how they do threat intelligence and how they do threat hunting. But also, if you're new to the industry, totally sit down and pick up defense if that's interesting to you. You don't need to be the most experienced defender to start doing threat hunting, and learning about how to do threat hunting will help you with any defense role. So other things that you could read about if you're really serious about implementing a threat hunting program in your organization is how do we connect this to our threat model? That's a really important step. We can do all sorts of cool experiments all day long, but if they're based off of a threat model we don't have, we're going to have a problem. We also want to prioritize the experiments that we do. Some experiments are more likely to be prove our hypothesis true than others. There are hypotheses that are way more likely of occurring, and then some that are, oh, well, there's a chance that some attackers learned how to do this thing. But if we haven't tested all of these other hypotheses that are more likely to be true, then we're probably misplacing our investments. So that's another area that you can learn it. And this is a presentation at a security conference, and there's a lot of business around security. So I don't know if I'm allowed to give a presentation in front of a security audience without a call to action. So I have a call to action slide. Learn stuff. This is security. Security can be fun. It can be exciting. I really enjoy my career, and I've had a lot of fun doing the different cases that I've worked in, but you should learn. Events like this, events like Hack Miami, are the places where you'll be next to other people who want to learn and want to share their knowledge and compete in the CTF. Hopefully you enjoyed something related to the talks today, if you're watching them. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't hear my voice right now. But hopefully you also had a chance to check out the CTF. And there's still a few hours left. So if you haven't yet, go check out either the beginner or advanced CTF so you can get started and learn things. And the other thing about learning things that may or may not make you money is we should be learning fun stuff. We don't want to just learn things because there might be a return for us and we might get a career. Security is broad enough that if you find something interesting and that you find fun, keep learning that, because you can probably turn it into a specialty. So focus on learning things, focus on having fun while learning things, enjoy community events like this, and then that might help you either do better threat hunting because you're going to be more informed, or at least have a more enjoyable career. So people, in addition to call to actions, usually put all sorts of links up on the screen. So here's my page full of links where you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn in/Cosomano, and I had the LinkedIn QR code up here. On Twitter, I'm HeavyVin. You can check out Cosomano.com, which occasionally has more information. And security community events like Hack Miami is another great place to find me. And if you go to find me and we're not there, you get to meet more interesting people, which is good. So regardless of if I'm there or not, you should go to more community events, because that is one of the most valuable things I did for my career, but also some of the most fun I've had in a lot of years has been at these community events with other engineers, with other people passionate about this. And it's a ton of fun and I learn a lot. So that's where you can find me. That's the end of the talk. I'm hoping for some questions, but also hope that you enjoyed this and you go play around, do some experiments in your own network.